Hey there folks, so in this video we're going to have a look at setting up the camera inside of our character, and what I've done here is I've just started a new little map and I've got a very flat kind of starting wall, so it's basically the starter floor, but I've just changed the scale just to make it kind of, a bit of a side scroller thing so we can test out what our character's going to look like from this side. And I've also just got a flattened out version over here so I can test what it's going to look like if it was a top down character, and I'm going to look at both of those in terms of character options. Now, in my content drawer, one of the things that I've got here is I've got this gunslinger character that I've gone through all of the processes we've done so far. I've used the textures, exported them out in order to get the individual sprites. I've created the flipbooks for him, and then in the papers ed content, I've created a source. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually apply him into an additional character that I've created. So I've got two versions of the character we've done so far. I've got this SS one, standing for side scroller, and I've got a top-down one, TD. Now what you'll notice is that when I open these up, because I haven't changed anything in the actual blueprint editor, they've basically just lost the ability to edit all that, see the viewport, see the tabs. You see they're still a child of that parent class, but to bring all that functionality back, I just need to click on Open Full Blueprint Editor. So I'll click on that for that one, and I'll click on it for there. And obviously we've already had a little bit of a play with the one which was our one that I've named here as top down, and one of the things that we identified was that he's not really designed to be used on the side because obviously he's got this little kind of shadowed area underneath him. So let's have a look at what about this one here, and I'm just going to put in a gunslinger. Let's go with we'll go with the shooting one just because it looks really cool. So we'll go with our attack, and you can see he's maybe just a little bit too small inside of there, but I'll maybe bring the capsule down just a little bit to match him, and we're going to change him into unlit and our left view. Yeah, and I just need to maybe move that capsule just a little bit more. So capsule is going to be something like that to get him to fit. So actually something around 50 is probably going to fine, and I can reduce him down a little bit as well on the actual capsule radius. Okay, so that's going to work fine for what we've got now. But the problem is going to be when we actually put this into the game world, because as I drag this in and put this in, it is a playable character, and I've got the top down one over there and the side scroller one over here. But how am I going to view this character in the game world while I'm playing the game? Well, what I've got to start looking at now is putting an actual camera actor in. And one of the things you're probably going to do with a 2D game is have a separate camera with extra functionality on there, like maybe a separate actor that is set up to look at our character, maybe restricted by the room, by the height, maybe set to follow us so it doesn't follow up and down when we're jumping. Maybe it stays static for the jump, but if we go over a certain distance away from it, then it lerps and moves up. There's a lot of things we can do, and we might come back and explore those as individual kind of separate camera examples. But for now, what we're just going to do is we're going to attach a camera to this character. So we've got our side scroller one starting, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the capsule component, and I'm going to add myself a spring arm. And this spring arm is what's going to keep our camera at the right distance and at the right angle looking at this. Now you can see here, when we're adding one in, it's designed for our third person one by default. It's designed to put the camera directly behind. So if I actually keep the spring arm selected and go and type in camera and add myself in a camera, you can see that now my camera would be right behind my character. And if I was to actually look at my character from that direction, you can see I'm going to lose them because they're obviously completely flat. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to take our spring arm and we need to rotate it round. And you can see if I rotate it around 90 degrees, now my character's obviously facing forward on this X direction, but I'm looking at them from this direction instead. And if we just go back and have a look at what this is going to look like in our world, now you can see that there's a preview down in this bottom right corner that shows us what this actually is. Now there's a bunch of stuff that you can play around with on here. We can go to our actual spring arm and we can change the target arm length. And what I'm going to do here, just to make this a little bit easier, is I'm actually going to just undock this for a sec and just make a couple of changes on those variables so you can see the preview as I do it. So for example, the target arm length, if I change that to 500, you can see that now this has pulled my character out, pulled my camera view out much further away from the character. Whereas something like 150, shorten it, it's going to bring me right in. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the best number, the specific number is that's going to be here. What I would recommend to you is that you go and have a look at other games that have a very similar camera system to you and try and estimate what their camera kind of target arm length is going to be. Do they have the character quite large on the screen? Do they have the character quite far off and able to see a lot of the area and the level around them? Now, other things that we can do, we can also change the socket offset and the target offset. And what you'll see is that as these are edited, what we're doing is we're either changing the end point of the spring arm or the end point where the camera is. So for example, in this one, maybe I want my character to be a little bit lower down. So I might end up increasing this up a little bit. Now this is one of those ones where if it was a 3D character, we'd be really focusing on how we're rotating around our character, but you can see there already that's dropped my character down much closer to this floor area. Lots of kind of vertical space above them, whereas something like maybe 75 would still give me a lot of floor below. And it's one of those, again, go and have a look at it in different games and think how much floor space is there, how much view does the character have underneath them. Are they literally just walking on a floor that's right at the bottom of the screen? Or do we have a whole bunch of the floor and foreground elements and things below that? So that's kind of okay right now for our side scroller. I can obviously play around with a whole bunch of other things in terms of this, but let's just go and have a look at what our top-down character is going to be. And then we'll come back and we'll have a think about things like orthographic and perspective. So our top-down character, I had set this character up in order to put them here onto the side, but as we determined, the shadow doesn't really work for that. So if I bring this guy down, you can see that he is going to walk on the floor. That's going to look all right, but bottom of his shield's being cut off and the bottom of the shadow's being cut off. Because actually what this artwork is designed for is that this character is a top-down one, and I've already got one over here. So what I'm meant to be doing really with this one is actually taking this sprite and designing it to be used from a top-down perspective. Now, I still want to use the arrow that's here to indicate that this is forward. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to take the sprite and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees here. And you can see that now my character is viewed from the top. The capsule is determining where he is. So that's the thing that's going to be colliding with our world. And I'm going to be trying to view this character from up here, like this. There we go. Now you can see I probably need to do a little bit of editing on this, but I probably can take this, knowing that this is, all the way down at 74. So that's 74 down there. I can actually move this pretty far down and not have any issues, because as long as it is just above, or even quite far above, that capsule, this is actually going to hit him. Now the other thing that you need to think about here when you're doing your top-down character, so if I go and have a view of this from the top, is that now we are essentially using the capsule's actual half radius here, so the capsule radius here, we're using this as our kind of detector. We're no longer using the half height to work out the height of our character, we're using our radius, and so our character is essentially becoming a little bit of a bubble, a little circle here. Now I can't go any further than what I've set as my half height, so this might be one where you're going to have a taller one if you've got quite a large. But you can see here 74, that's quite a large one just as it is. So it depends on how accurate you want to be, how close to the actual kind of pixels for the top and the bottom. But you can see here something like 70, and I've got a little ball that goes around my character. If I want to give the player a little bit of leeway, then being a little bit generous, something like 50 means that I could probably avoid things that are maybe just scraping the top of these feathery things at the top, or just scraping along the bottom of his feet. So just going back to 70 just for a moment there, and what we will see now is that we need to put in some kind of camera to view this, and it's the exact same process that we've just done. I'm going to take the capsule component, I'm going to add a spring arm, and on that spring arm I'm going to add myself a camera. Now again, the spring arm is looking at the back of the capsule because it's designed for looking forward with our third person kind of character setups. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring this spring arm round, and then I'm going to rotate it to look directly down. So that's a 90 and then 90, and that's just so I can keep the actual kind of camera orientation of what is forward and what is right on that camera, just in case I need to use that data. And I'm probably not going to mess around with any of the offsets on this one, but let's just go and have a look at what that looks like in our level now. So obviously we can see when we're in our level, this is what the preview looks like, and we're quite large on the screen. We're probably not going to play a 2D game where the character is really that large, because that's going to mean that we're not going to get a lot of view of what's around our character. So again, use some references. I'm just going to throw a larger number in just to show you the difference here. And again, let's go with 500. And you can see that we're now pulling ourselves out bit by bit. 750 can pull out even further. So play around with that number. Keep on changing that. Use the references, compare, and see how big should my character be as they are moving around in this world. So you can see here, as they're moving around, what is this going to look like? And in the future, we're going to add some inputs in. But this is just a good little preview exercise for us. Okay, so the last little bits then that I want us to just have a look at is the difference between orthographic and perspective. And we can do this on either of the cameras. And just to get us started, what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to throw some extra objects, extra blocks and things just into these worlds here, just so I can show you what they look like when they're working on perspective or orthographic. Okay, so I've spent just a couple of moments there and I've just put in some basic white cubes, and you don't necessarily have to do this. You're going to be able to experiment with this later as you start putting in your own kind of level decorative elements. But I just wanted to show you what the difference is between the perspective and the orthographic camera. Now, as you can see here with this little guy, where I'm seeing the preview of him with the perspective camera on, you can see how objects are obviously going off in the distance. They were taking into account the fact that it's in perspective, so we can see the sides of things. And as it moves around, you can see that things are going to be moving at different paces and different speeds based on how close or far away from the camera they are. Now that might be something you're looking at for. And up until very recently in Unreal, it was very difficult to do a good orthographic camera. Up until 5.2, it was not the greatest of options. 5.3, there is a new orthographic camera option, which does help. But up until that, many 2D games, most 2D games in Unreal were created just using the perspective thing and just separating out each of these things so they're much closer together if you don't want to get a lot of movement between them. The same thing can be said for the perspective if we're looking over here. You can see I've got this little guy, and as he moves around, you can see that I can see the different angles and sides. Probably would have the shadows and stuff off, but you can see the different perspectives and angles of these. Now that's great on your kind of 2D, 3D hybrid, where maybe you want to have 3D objects with a 2D sprite walking around. You know, your kind of HD, 2D kind of stuff like Octopath Traveler, which again is made in Unreal. But for this purpose, I just want these to maybe just be flat boxes, buildings and locations that my character is running around. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and look in our camera, and inside of the camera we have the option here from our projection mode to change this from perspective to orthographic. And what you'll see is straight away this completely changed the way that this is going to feel. Now we're looking directly down on this, and there's no depth, there's no kind of perspective element, no matter how close these things are to us or far away from us they are. So that's probably just outside the camera's view, but you can see there, even if it's high up, it's still in the same place. Even if it's all the way down there, it's still in the same place. And this means that now our character can move around and everything is completely flat, no matter what depth they're on. Now in 5.2, there were issues with this one. So if you are using an older version of the engine, you would find that orthographic cameras wouldn't show their preview. But as I said, as of 5.3, the orthographic camera got improved and replaced. So now things like this are way, way more achievable. So we'll go camera, and I can show you it on the side scroller character. And now can you see how that suddenly completely changed the view of what this feels like? Now this is very much your kind of Mario-esque kind of thing now, where I'm looking at this, there's no element of depth to the side view. These are completely flat, no matter how far back they are from the character, they are just looked at from their side. Now again, this is where you might want to go in and you might want to start messing around with those camera offsets to get this to maybe have the camera higher up, because do you want to lose half of your screen space to floor and things below? Well, maybe if your character is going to be able to go down and underneath these things, maybe you want them in the middle of the screen, or maybe you want them lower down, maybe you want them down here. But again, that's on the spring arm, so go and change those things on the spring arm. Now that we've got this orthographic view, you can see that we have this ortho width And this is basically going to be how much is going to be showed in that view. So if I just take that 1536 and maybe reduce that down to 750, and what we'll see now is that the camera is basically being placed around 750 units out in order to create this view. Now that's a lot better. Still probably don't want to lose 1/3 of my screen as floor, depending on the type of game obviously. But I can keep on playing with these values now to bring this in and further away. And again, let's have a look. This is not the spring arm one. We want the ortho width. So maybe 750 on this one. What does that look like from the top down? Let's just go and pop and have a little bit of a look at him. He's much bigger on the screen. And as he's moving around, you can see that he is obviously quite large. There's not a lot of space for him to be able to view this one. So actually in this instance, 1500 is actually not too bad of a number, but we can even go higher. We could go to 2000 and see how that's going to pull him out even further away to make him kind of, be represented on that screen. Okay, so the last little thing that I wanted to cover with the camera. What you'll notice is with this one here, as I move him around and move it along, I'm going to have my camera staying exactly where it is. And that's because this is on the ortho width, and that works fine. You can see he pops behind these elements, and that just basically is saying that the camera is this far away. Let's render it out and take the kind of the view of what it sees from this distance. But if I was using a perspective view, so if I just go here onto the perspective view, you'll see that we have a bunch of options down here. Let's just try and find them here. So they're just in the spring arm. So if I go into the spring arm, what you'll see is that our spring arm has this do collision test, and that's default ticked on. So what's going to happen is if actually our camera is using the perspective view and we move it, we're going to end up impacting and collision testing. And that's because our camera and our spring arm, they're firing at this trace line. And if that trace line gets obstructed by something, so as it moves along and it gets obstructed, you can see there, it moves the camera until it's close enough to not be obstructed anymore. So do we want it to be able to do that? Well, you just saw that the orthographic view does kind of fix that for us. But if we are working on the perspective one of the things you might want to do is just turn the collision test off. And that means now anything that obscures the camera's view is not going to affect and move that camera in anymore. So that's great for adding foreground details, things that might obscure your character very shortly, like a pillar or a tree that maybe is in the foreground, because you don't want your camera to be jumping in and out as they move along with that. Now the last little option that we have in here, and I'm going to show you where it is, but we'll really work on it as we get our character actually moving around, is that we can add an actual camera lag onto here. So one of the things that I can do is I can go onto our spring arm and I can go to the lag section, and you can see I can enable camera lag. And if I tick this, basically it's going to mean that our camera is going to lag and be dragged behind slightly where the position of this character is. So as they move, the camera's trying to catch up with that, and it just creates a bit more of a kind of smooth movement as the character's speeding around, animating, moving around. You'll have this camera that's just following behind, trying to follow them. The camera lag speed is going to determine how far behind it's going to end up, so we can speed it up or slow it down. And we can also set a max distance of how far away it can get left, because maybe you are doing something like rolling across the floor or sliding, and they're very quick actions. You might want to have it that doing a really quick action like a lunge or something like that isn't going to leave your camera really far behind every time you do it, especially if maybe the character has the ability to keep on lunging and rolling over and over and over again. Do they keep on increasing this number? So maybe we need to just max out and clamp that number just to make sure. Okay, so we will look at that as our character starts moving, which we're going to do in the future. But for now, you can see we have multiple different options for setting up cameras on our character, whether it is a side scroller or a top down. The things that we're looking at here is the rotation of the sprite and also the rotation of our spring arm for where that places our camera in the world. Once we've got a camera in the world, we want to start messing around with the actual target arm length of our spring arm to determine how far away it's going to be held. Maybe having a look at the actual camera collision. You see I can turn this off on the top down as well. And also the lag, so we can just get that smooth kind of movement of our camera. Once all that's done, have a look as well and play around with the difference between your projection mode being perspective or orthographic, and see what changing those that ortho width distance is going to do. Now with the perspective, you're probably going to mess around with the target arm length of the spring arm itself, but see what they look like and see how they match up with other games and the references for what they might do in terms of having their characters on the screen. Now there's no fixed and hard numbers, but experiment and see what works for you. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.